In the dead of night, deep beneath Buckingham Palace, Princess Anne forced open a locked drawer that should never have existed. What she found inside wasn't just papers. It was a carefully built system of leverage, photographs, recorded conversations, signed confessions, all written in Camilla's elegant hand. And Charles's name appeared in the margins, again and again. She knew instantly, if these files ever left the palace walls, the monarchy itself could fall. Before the sun rose, her brother stood in front of her, pale with fury and fear. One cold order. Destroy them, every page, tonight, no copies, no witnesses. She watched the flames take everything. By morning, only ash remained. And between brother and sister, a silence that never healed. But one question refuses to die. What else is still locked away beneath the palace, and who else knows it's there? Hit subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss the next royal storyline. Drop a comment and tell me, where are you watching from? In the dead of night, beneath the ancient stones of Buckingham Palace, a single figure moved through corridors few outsiders have ever seen. Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, had entered the private archives, a place of locked drawers, forgotten ledgers, and secrets the monarchy has guarded for generations. Her heart was pounding. What she found there would force a confrontation that cut straight to the heart of the crown itself. According to the account that has now surfaced, Anne pried open a drawer that should never have existed. Inside lay a thick folder belonging to Camilla, photographs, recorded conversations, signed confessions, pages filled with Camilla's elegant handwriting meticulously organized, each one a piece of carefully collected leverage over powerful figures. The evidence, the story claims, was damning enough to topple the monarchy. And in the margins, again and again, appeared the name of her brother, Charles. What could drive a senior royal to risk everything for such papers? And why would files of this nature even exist inside the palace walls? The questions hang heavy. Royal protocol has long demanded absolute discretion. Private archives are meant to protect the institution, not threaten it. Yet here, according to this account, sat material that could rewrite history. Anne's hands trembled as the full weight of the danger became clear. These were not ordinary documents. They represented years of calculated influence, secrets that reached far beyond one family. The monarchy has survived scandals, wars, and public storms by carefully controlling what leaves its walls. A folder like this, if real, would shatter that control overnight. Before dawn, Charles confronted his sister in a dimly lit corridor. His face, the account says, was pale with fury and fear. "Destroy them," he ordered, voice low and final. "Every page. Tonight, no copies, no witnesses." Anne hesitated only a moment. Then she watched as the files were fed into the palace incinerator. Flames consumed the photographs, the recordings, the confessions. By morning, only ash remained. And between brother and sister, a silence settled that the story suggests would never fully heal. Why would a future king demand the complete destruction of evidence that might have protected, or destroyed, the crown? Was this an act of protection, or of panic? Royal commentators have long noted that Charles and Camilla's relationship has always carried layers of complexity, shaped by decades of public scrutiny and private loyalty. Yet this account goes further, painting a picture of documents so dangerous that even their existence had to be erased. The archives beneath Buckingham Palace are not mere storage rooms. They hold the institutional memory of the monarchy, correspondence, records, and materials that help preserve continuity across generations. To enter them under cover of darkness, to force open a locked drawer that should never have existed, suggests a breach of the deepest protocols. Princess Anne has spent a lifetime upholding duty and tradition. For her to take such a risk implies the stakes were extraordinary. And what of Camilla's role in this narrative? The files are described as her blackmail materials, organized in her own hand. If true, they would represent a calculated system of influence reaching into the highest levels of power. The monarchy has always operated on the principle that certain truths remain private for the good of the institution. Blackmail files of this kind would invert that principle entirely, turning secrecy into a weapon. Charles's order was absolute. No copies, no witnesses, total destruction before the sun rose. The incinerator reduced everything to ash. In royal tradition, fire has sometimes been used to close chapters that cannot be allowed to open. Letters have been burned, diaries destroyed. Yet the scale suggested here, photographs, recordings, signed confessions, points to something far more systematic. The silence that followed between Anne and Charles is described as permanent. Sibling relationships within the royal family have always carried unique pressures. Shared duty can bind tightly, but shared secrets can create distances that never fully close. Anne has long been known for her straightforward loyalty to the crown. Charles, as heir and later king, has carried the weight of institutional survival. Their confrontation in that corridor, according to this account, left a fracture neither could mend. Public fascination with the royal family often focuses on ceremonies, tour, and carefully managed appearances. Yet behind the pageantry lies a private world where decisions made in the dark can shape the institution for decades. A locked drawer, a thick folder, a late-night order to destroy. These details, if accurate, reveal how thin the line can be between protection and peril. What larger forces might have driven Camilla to compile such materials over years? The account offers no clear answer, only the evidence of careful organization and the repeated appearance of Charles's name in the margins. Leverage over powerful figures suggests a network of influence that extended well beyond the palace. For the monarchy, any such network would represent an existential risk. The crown's authority rests in part on the perception that it stands above ordinary political maneuvering. Blackmail files would collapse that perception in an instant. Anne's decision to destroy the papers, rather than preserve or expose them, speaks to a profound calculation. Destroying evidence that could topple the monarchy might itself be an act of institutional self-preservation, or it might be an act of personal loyalty to a brother whose name appeared too often in those margins. The story leaves both possibilities open, forcing us to weigh the cost of silence against the danger of revelation. By morning the ash was cold, the drawer was empty. The corridor held only the memory of a confrontation that would never be spoken of again. Yet stories of this kind, once they surface, refuse to stay buried. They raise questions about the private machinery of power, about the lengths to which the family will go to protect itself, and about the secrets that may still lie in other locked drawers beneath the palace. If this account holds even a fragment of truth, it reveals how fragile the balance of trust can be at the highest levels of the monarchy. A sister discovers a threat. A brother orders its erasure. Flames consume the evidence, and a silence settles that never fully heals. The ashes had barely cooled when the weight of what had been lost began to settle over the palace. According to the account, the incinerator had done its work thoroughly. Photographs, recorded conversations, signed confessions, every page reduced to nothing. Yet destruction does not always erase consequence. The silence between Princess Anne and her brother Charles, the story claims, became a living presence in the corridors they both still walked. Royal tradition has long treated certain private materials as radioactive. Once discovered, they must be contained or eliminated. The locked drawer that should never have existed had held precisely that kind of material. Camilla's elegant handwriting had organized years of leverage, the account says, each entry carefully catalogued. When Anne opened that drawer, she did not simply find papers. She found a system, and systems of that nature do not appear overnight. Why collect such evidence over years? The narrative offers no direct confession, only the implication of power carefully accumulated. Charles's name appearing repeatedly in the margins suggests the files touched the very center of the future monarchy. For a sister who has spent her life in service to the crown, the discovery would have been devastating on multiple levels. Personal loyalty collided with institutional survival in the space of a few dark hours. Charles's order: destroy them. Every page, tonight, no copies, No witnesses carried the finality of a royal command issued under extreme pressure. In the hierarchy of the family, the heir's word on matters of security has historically carried enormous force. Anne's brief hesitation, then compliance, reveals the gravity of the moment. She did not argue. She did not preserve a single page. She watched the flames take everything. That act of watching is itself significant. To stand beside the incinerator and see evidence capable of toppling the monarchy turn to ash is to participate in a deliberate rewriting of the record. The monarchy has always controlled its own history through selective preservation and selective destruction. Letters burned, diaries locked away. But the scale described here, photographs, audio recordings, signed confessions, points to something more deliberate and more dangerous than ordinary private correspondence. The silence that followed between brother and sister is described as one that would never fully heal. Within the royal family, shared knowledge can bind or divide. When that knowledge is deliberately erased, the bond itself can fracture. Anne has long been regarded as one of the most pragmatic and duty-driven members of the family. Charles has carried the burden of continuity. Their confrontation in the dim corridor, according to this account, left a permanent distance. They continued their public roles. The institution moved forward, but something essential between them had been consumed along with the papers. What does it mean for the monarchy when its own senior figures feel compelled to destroy evidence rather than confront it? The story raises that question without answering it. Protection of the crown can look, from certain angles, like concealment of threat. Charles's pale face, fury mixed with fear, suggests he understood the dual danger, the files themselves, and the possibility that knowledge of their existence might spread. Camilla's role remains the most opaque element. The files are attributed to her, organized in her hand, containing leverage over powerful figures. If the account is accurate, she had constructed a private archive of influence that reached into the highest levels. The monarchy has always depended on the perception that it stands apart from the ordinary transactions of power. A collection of blackmail materials would collapse that perception. Destroying them may have been the only way to preserve the illusion of distance. Yet the act of destruction itself creates a new secret. Anne and Charles now shared knowledge of what had been found and what had been burned. That shared knowledge, the story suggests, became a barrier rather than a bridge. In royal life, where so much is already constrained by protocol and public expectation, private fractures can deepen over years of necessary performance. The private archives beneath Buckingham Palace are more than storage. They represent the institutional memory of the crown, records that help maintain continuity across reigns. A locked drawer that should never have existed implies a hidden layer within that memory, one not sanctioned by the usual custodians. Anne's decision to enter those archives in the dead of night suggests she already suspected something irregular. The discovery confirmed the worst of those suspicions. By morning, the physical evidence was gone, but the psychological evidence remained. A brother who ordered total erasure, a sister who carried out the order, a queen consort whose private papers had posed an existential risk. The monarchy continued its public calendar. Appearances were kept. Duties were fulfilled. Yet according to this account, the silence between Anne and Charles marked a quiet rupture in the family's internal architecture. Royal commentators have often observed that the strongest institutions are those that manage internal conflict without allowing it to become public. The events described here stayed private by design. No copies, no witnesses, only ash. The success of that containment, if the story is true, may have preserved the institution in the short term. The cost, the narrative implies, was paid in the relationship between two of its most senior members. What larger pattern might this episode reveal? The collection of leverage over powerful figures points to a private system of influence operating inside the palace walls. The decision to destroy, rather than investigate or neutralize that system, points to a preference for absolute erasure over controlled resolution. Both choices carry consequences that can echo for decades. Anne's hands had trembled when she first understood the danger. Charles's voice had been cold and final when he ordered the destruction. Those two physical details, trembling hands, cold voice, anchor the human cost of an institutional decision. The monarchy is sustained by people who must sometimes choose between personal truth and collective survival. In this account, both chose survival. The price was a silence that never fully healed. The corridor where they confronted each other has since seen countless other footsteps. The incinerator has been used for more ordinary purposes. The locked drawer, if it still exists, is empty. Yet the story of what was found and what was burned continues to surface, forcing outsiders to ask how many other drawers remain locked, and how many other silences have been sealed in ash. The monarchy's strength has always rested partly on the public's willingness to accept that certain matters remain private for the good of the whole. Episodes like the one described test that willingness. When the private materials are themselves instruments of power, the justification for secrecy becomes more complicated. Destruction may protect the crown. It may also protect individuals whose names appear in the margins. Charles and Anne returned to their respective duties. The institution moved forward, but according to the account, something essential had been altered in the space of a single night. A folder of carefully collected secrets had been reduced to ash. The relationship between brother and sister had been marked by a fracture that protocol alone could not repair. The ash settled. The drawer stood empty. The corridor returned to its ordinary quiet. Yet the account of that night continues to press against the careful surface of royal life, raising questions that no amount of protocol can fully silence. According to the story, Princess Anne had entered the private archives beneath Buckingham Palace under cover of darkness and opened a locked drawer that should never have existed. Inside, she found Camilla's blackmail files, photographs, recorded conversations, signed confessions, all meticulously organized in elegant handwriting. Charles's name appeared far too often in the margins. The danger was immediate and institutional. Before dawn, her brother confronted her, pale with fury and fear, and ordered every page destroyed. No copies, no witnesses. Anne watched the papers feed into the palace incinerator. By morning, only ash remained, and a silence between brother and sister that the narrative says would never fully heal. That sequence of events, if accurate, reveals how quickly private discovery can escalate into an act of institutional self-preservation. The monarchy has long survived by controlling what leaves its walls. When the threat originates inside those walls, the response can become absolute. Destruction in the dead of night is not merely practical. It is symbolic. Fire has closed chapters the crown cannot afford to leave open. In this case, the chapter contained leverage over powerful figures, carefully accumulated over years. Its erasure protected the appearance of distance between the monarchy and the ordinary transactions of power. Yet erasure carries its own cost. Anne and Charles now shared knowledge of what had been found and what had been burned. That shared knowledge, according to the account, became a barrier rather than a bond. Within a family already shaped by duty, public performance, and the constant pressure of continuity, a silence of this kind can deepen over years of necessary restraint. They continued their roles. Appearances were maintained. The calendar of royal life moved forward. But something essential between them had been altered in the space of a few dark hours. What does such an episode suggest about the internal architecture of the monarchy? The locked drawer that should never have existed points to hidden layers within the institutional memory of the crown. Private archives are meant to preserve continuity, not to conceal systems of influence. Camilla's alleged files inverted that purpose. They turned secrecy into a potential weapon. Charles's decision to order their total destruction suggests he judged the risk of exposure greater than the risk of incomplete knowledge. Anne's compliance suggests she reached the same conclusion. Together, they chose the survival of the institution over the preservation of evidence that could have rewritten its history. Royal tradition has always balanced transparency with necessary discretion. Moments like the one described test that balance to its limits. When the materials in question are themselves instruments of leverage, the justification for secrecy becomes more complex. Destroying them may have safeguarded the crown in the immediate term. It may also have left unresolved questions about how such materials came to exist inside the palace in the first place, and whose interests they ultimately served. The silence that settled between Anne and Charles is described as permanent. Sibling relationships inside the royal family are already constrained by hierarchy, public expectation, and the demands of service. When those relationships are further marked by a shared act of erasure, the distance can become structural. Anne has long been regarded as one of the most straightforward and duty-driven members of the family. Charles has carried the weight of institutional continuity. Their confrontation in the dim corridor, the story claims, left a fracture that neither protocol nor time fully repaired. Public fascination with the royal family often focuses on ceremonies, tour, and carefully managed narratives. Behind those narratives lies a private world where decisions made before dawn can shape the institution for decades. A trembling hand opening a forbidden drawer, a cold voice ordering total destruction, flames consuming photographs, recordings, and confessions. These details, if true, illustrate how thin the line can be between protection and concealment. The monarchy's enduring strength has rested partly on the public's willingness to accept that certain matters remain private for the good of the whole. Episodes of this nature challenge that willingness. When the private materials threaten the very foundation of the institution, the choice to destroy rather than confront becomes both pragmatic and profound. The ash that remained by morning represented more than the end of a folder. It represented a deliberate decision about what the future record would be allowed to contain. In the years that followed, according to the logic of the account, the palace continued its outward rhythm. Duties were fulfilled, public engagements proceeded. The locked drawer, if it still exists, holds nothing. The incinerator has returned to more ordinary use. Yet the knowledge of what was found and what was burned remains with the two people who stood in that corridor. Their silence, the story suggests, is the lasting evidence. What this night may mean for the future of the royal family is not a matter of prediction, but of reflection. Institutions survive by managing internal threats without allowing them to become public crises. The complete destruction of the files achieved that containment. The personal cost, paid in the relationship between brother and sister, remains private by design. Whether that cost strengthens or weakens the broader structure is a question the public can only weigh from the outside. The monarchy has endured because it has mastered the art of controlled narrative. When the narrative itself is threatened by materials gathered inside its own walls, the response can be absolute. Ash is final. Silence is lasting. And the questions that surface afterward refuse to be entirely extinguished. What do you think this story reveals about the private machinery of the crown? Share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more royal family news as further layers continue to emerge.